This season of Trucksafe Live is presented by LogRock. LogRock builds technology tools to help trucking companies stay compliant with federal and state regulations. LogRock is easier. We connect to multiple systems like your FMCSA account and ELD, so you only have to use one system. LogRock is faster. We automate tedious tasks so you can use your time more effectively. LogRock is smarter. We notify you of issues like expiring or missing documents before they happen, so you can be proactive rather than reactive. Setup is easy, and most of our customers are online shortly after signing up. Request a demo now at logrock.com.
Hey everyone, welcome to episode 20 of Trucksafe Live, the show where we and our guest tackle the hot button issues impacting highway transportation. I'm Brandon. Trucksafe and Childress Law, both of which are dedicated to helping motor carriers develop and maintain cutting edge safety programs. It's been a busy week, busy month, I should say, thus far for us at Trucksafe. A lot of travel, spring break. And then Jared and I just got back from the American Trucking Association's SSHR conference in Minneapolis. We had the opportunity to talk about minimizing exposure through driver qualification. Seems to be a pretty popular topic recently, so had a good time there, met a lot of great people. Glad to be home. And so excited about today's show. It's one that's been in the making for a few weeks now. A lot of build up to it, a lot of folks telling us that they are particularly interested to hear about this topic. So I'm really excited to have on a couple of great guests to talk to us about combating the reptiles. You may recall, if you've watched our prior shows, we did a similar topic, episode 13, I think it was last year, where we had on Steve Bryan of Blue Wire to talk about how fleets are using technology to combat the so-called reptile theory of litigation and to protect themselves against nuclear verdicts. And it was a great discussion with Steve, always great talking with Steve and seeing what he's got going on. But we thought it was a perfect time to revisit this topic in light of some recent developments, particularly in Florida, with Florida's tort reform that was just recently signed by Governor DeSantis. So looking forward to talking about that today with our guest. Before we get there, a few things going on at Trucksafe and then in the industry. At Trucksafe, we've got an even busier month to come. So this coming up next week, actually, April 19th and 20th, we are having our Trucksafe Fleet Compliance Boot Camp in, like I said, in Indianapolis. It's going to be a 2-day conference where we are going to spend a lot of time talking about DOT compliance topics and how to build out a cutting-edge safety program. If you are a safety director or safety manager or someone who is responsible for managing the compliance of your fleet, we're going to spend a lot of time talking about those topics that are pertinent to your day-to-day tasks. And we got a couple spots left, so we're trying to limit that to a small group of 25 or so. We got just a couple spots left coming up next week. If you're in town, if you're close by, or you're interested in attending, be sure to check out trucksafebootcamp.com. You can see all the details there. You can register, and hopefully we will see you there. So that's next week. Something else we've always got kind of going on in the background is our Trucksafe Compliance Network. If you haven't heard of this, I'd encourage you to check it out. We have whoops, that was the wrong button. We have an app in the App Store or the Google Play Store where you can join the Trucksafe Compliance Network. This is free to join. This is a resource that we have available to fleets, again, safety professionals, those that need to know kind of the nitty-gritty of DOT safety regulations. This is a social network for safety professionals to gather together, ask questions of one another, answer questions for other folks, and it's also how we distribute a bunch of our DOT-related content, including network-exclusive webinars that we're trying to do on a monthly basis. So if you haven't checked that out, check it out, trucksafenetwork.com, or download the app on the App Store or the Google Play Store. Enough about us. Let's talk about a couple of things that are going on in the industry that are worth noting before we jump into today's topic. Most notably, today, FMCSA published a notice regarding its crash preventability determination program. We sent out an email blast on this. This is kind of breaking news. It's important news. We've got an article about it on our website. If you want to check that out, go to trucksafe.com. It's our most recent article. The Crash Preventability Determination Program, if you're not familiar with it, is the way that regulated motor carriers can essentially request that the FMCSA review the preventability of the accidents that get put on the motor carrier's safety measurement system account. And if the agency determines that it's non-preventable on the carrier's driver's part, then that accident does not weigh on the motor carrier's score anymore, and it improves their crash indicator score. So it's a very important for that reason. The program itself has only been around for a few years now. I think 2020 is when it was first stood up. One of the criticisms about the program over the years has been how narrow it is. It started out as a pilot program and has grown a little bit since that time, but right now the system is set up so that it only accepts certain types of accidents as eligible for a preventability determination. And it only accepts those specific, I think there are 16 types of accidents that are eligible for a preventability determination program. If it doesn't meet that eligibility guide, then it's not even going to be, you can't even submit the request and get it reviewed. The reason that the agency did that was because, especially when it was just a pilot program, they wanted to make sure that they were looking at accidents that were very clear, very easy to tell whose fault it was. And so they picked the accident types that are usually the most clear when it comes to who's at fault for that accident, and those are the types of accidents that they have accepted into the program and have determined are either preventable or non-preventable. Even despite that, the narrowness of the program, I think they said in their notice this morning that since 2020, they had received well over 35,000 submissions through the program for preventability determinations over that 3-year time period. And I think they said that of those approximately 40,000 that they received, 75% or so of them were deemed to be eligible for the program. And then of those 75% that they reviewed in the program, like 96% of them were determined to be not the fault of the commercial driver. They were determined to be non-preventable on the commercial driver's part. And so that's a lot of accidents coming off of those motors carrier scores. So again, just another reason why this is such an important program. All that is to say, FMCSA this morning said that they are going to broaden the program and allow more accident types to qualify as eligible for preventability consideration, which is great news. This is something that folks have been complaining about for a long time, me included. We're trying to broaden that program so that we can push more data into it and hopefully get accidents that are not our driver's fault taken off of our scores and therefore improve our scores. So again, if you haven't seen that, be sure to check out our article on the topic at trucksafe.com. What else is going on in the industry? I should have mentioned as we go along here, if you're here with us, say hey in the comments so that we know you're here. And as we go along, if you've got questions or you got comments on whatever we're talking about, throw them in the comments and we'll bring them up on screen. Good to see all of you here. One other thing kind of going on in the industry that's worth mentioning is the FMCSA's proposed changes to its safety measurement system. This happened probably about a month or so ago. This was big news at the time. So clearly the FMCSA is kind of ramping up its regulatory work here, and those proposed changes to the safety measurement system are very significant. We did a full breakdown of this on a prior episode of Trucksafe Live. We've got an article on the topic on our website. It's essentially would be the first substantial revisions to CSA scores since CSA was first implemented back in 2010. So big news there, worth looking into. The FMCSA has been holding some listening sessions on the topic over the last few weeks or so. I've attended a couple of those. So make sure you understand what is changing there, because it could have pretty significant impacts to your CSA scores. FMCSA, last thing I'll say about it is the agency has a preview site set up for those changes right now. So if you want to see how your scores are going to be impacted by these proposed changes, you can log into your account right now and see exactly how your scores are going to change. Make sure you do that, because the comment period for those changes closes in mid-May, I believe. So if you go in there and you're seeing something screwy with your scores because of the changes, make sure you file your comments with the agency so they are aware of the problems that you're seeing and they can fix them before they push this out in a final form. I don't expect that will happen until later this year at the earliest. If not, then it'll probably be next year. But we'll see. Check that out if you haven't already. Let's see here. I think that is it. Let's talk about the topic of today's show. Again, I'm excited about it. Today we are, like I said, we're taking a slight twist on that topic that we've already discussed. Not only in that episode 13, our very first episode of Trucksafe Live was all about nuclear verdicts and ways that the industry is fighting back against these types of cases, including through tort reform. Like I said, we're excited to have a couple of guests with us who are working tirelessly to help motor carriers minimize their risk to these types of verdicts. First up, we have Alix Miller, President and CEO of the Florida Trucking Association. Welcome, Alix.
Thanks for having me on.
Hey, thanks so much for joining me. Really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us today. I know you've been pretty busy here over the last couple of weeks, so thanks so much for taking the time. Hey,
my pleasure.
Excellent. So to get things kind of started here, I wondered if for folks who aren't part of the Florida Trucking Association, may not be familiar with you, can you give us a little bit of your background and how you got into the trucking industry to begin with?
Well, I have a background in communications and legislative affairs. So in a lot of ways, trucking found me. This was a job opening several years ago where those two skills were kind of in need. They were looking for a position to be filled, and it was the vice president position. So I started out and learned all I could about trucking. And so then, I guess 5 years later, became the president and CEO.
There's a lot that goes into trucking, as I'm sure you've become painfully familiar with, especially on the legislative and regulatory front. And that's kind of why we wanted to talk with you, especially in light of recent developments in Florida, particularly. Before we dive into exactly what has happened within the last few weeks here, can you kind of give us a sense of, generally for folks who may not be who may not be operating in Florida or in that area of the country, what the trucking landscape is like in Florida, for those who may be curious?
Florida is a pretty tough state to do business in for trucking. We're not a drive-through state. We have a lot of challenges when it comes to our geography and our population. I think last year the record number of 137 million tourists visited Florida. We have 1,000 people moving here a day in the state, and that's a lot of retirees. And then obviously with tourists, first of all, a lot of people who are not familiar with our roads, but also people who are consuming a lot of things and not manufacturing. So we really require the lion's share of freight to come into Florida, and it's pretty inefficient to deliver it and to get back out of the state. For example, you're coming from North Carolina or Georgia and delivering down to Miami. It's a full day just to leave. So, and most of the time when you're leaving Florida, you're leaving, you're deadheading or, leaving, empty. So we really do have a lot of challenges, and not to mention hurricanes and our wonderful ports who, obviously require a lot of trucks as well.
Yeah, and count me as one of those tourists. I was honored to have to be at your safety summit, the Florida Trucking Association safety summit earlier this year. Brought my family down and did the whole Disney World thing. Had a lot of fun doing that. But I can imagine, with that being such a big part of the economy down there, that passenger transportation plays a big part when it comes to Florida, which really raises the stakes. I'm preaching to the choir here, but when you're transporting bus loads of passengers, that really causes some or creates some unique exposure for sure. Want to talk about, as we get into talking about tort reform, you mentioned kind of Florida's challenges from the trucking industry at large, but why has Florida, in your view, become such a problematic state for highway accident litigation involving large trucks and buses? What about Florida's judicial system has made cases like we'll talk about, I'm sure, the recent $1 billion jury verdict case? What has set up that type of possibility in Florida?
I think the system has gone largely unchecked for more than 20 years in Florida. Trial attorneys have really run the show. And if you are a visitor in Florida, driving on I-95, I-75, I-4, I-10, you're inundated with these billboards, with some of the biggest names and the biggest law firms are based in Florida, advertising, truck accidents and what they can do for you. Legislatively, and even with Supreme Court or state Supreme Court in the past, it has always been really leaning towards the trial bar versus defendants or small business.
Yeah, I take it then that you probably have some billboard hammers down in Florida. We've got the hammer here in Indiana. You can't drive 5 miles without seeing at least 5 of his billboards. So, yeah. So, with that in mind, can you tell us about HB House Bill 837 and that legislation, and kind of set that up for us? What is it, and what happened with it here within the last few weeks?
Sure. So the governor has touted it as the most historic and biggest tort reform legislation in the history of the state. And it incorporates 7 or 8 major issues across most industries. It includes modifications to bad faith for insurance, contingency fee multipliers, one-way attorney fees, premises liability, which is becoming another big issue of kind of apartments lawsuits. But for trucking, we set out years ago to kind of develop a priority list of the things that would move the needle the most for trucking at large. And we identified a few key things, which all got into the bill. The first one is transparency of medical damages, or to combat those inflated medical damages, and also level the playing field when it comes to the evidence that plaintiffs and defendants are allowed to submit and for the jury to see. We also have modified our comparative negligence system. Florida has been a pure comparative negligence system, meaning that if you're 1% at fault, you could be awarded that 1%. And I always say there's a law firm in Tallahassee that actually played an ad during legislative session, shame on them, saying that if you are 90% at fault, don't worry, we'll make a windfall out of that 10%. So now we are going to be, if a plaintiff is more than 50% at fault, they no longer can recover damages. And then the third is also changing our statute of limitations for negligence cases from 4 years to 2 years.
Yeah, I think that comparative fault scheme, a lot of folks aren't familiar with it, but every state kind of handles it a little bit differently. You've got, like you mentioned, Alex, you got pure comparative fault states. Some states will say that if a plaintiff is injured or is killed in a highway accident and they bring suit against somebody else, as long as they can establish that that other party is 1% at fault, they are still entitled to recover damages that equal 1% of whatever the jury ultimately awards. And that, I mean, it could be huge. It sounds kind of comical saying it that way, but if you got $1 billion jury verdict and they're looking at recovering 1%, it's still a huge problem. So the move to a modified comparative fault, which a lot of states also have, I think is a good move, and I think it should cut down on some of that abuse that we're seeing, because like you said, what it does is essentially says that you got to be 51% at fault or more before we're going to levy damages against you. So yeah, I think that's a huge move. So I'm curious, how did the Florida Trucking Association, what was its role in this process of getting the legislation across the finish line here?
Well, we were really one of the leading faces on it, along with other kind of members of a coalition. We really, across the board, industries in Florida for 5, 15, 20 years have been trying to change things and improve the climate, the legal climate in Florida, mostly to no avail. And FTA has been involved in trying to get bills filed for years. I think one of the key issues for us, or moments of change, was we had filed a couple of amicus briefs with the Florida Supreme Court. The first one was summary judgments, but the second, more important one that we also received a favorable opinion on was what's known as Dial versus Calusa Palms. And this was about paid medical damages. And it brought attention to the Supreme Court justices of these phantom damages, and that the jury would not be hearing about paid damages that we paid presently and in the future. Therefore, a verdict is wildly out of line with what that plaintiff is actually going to be paying for. So this really set us up a couple of years ago, where we really kind of hunkered down on this, and this as a priority for the association, of taking this kind of judicial win and bringing it to legislators. Of, this has been a ruling, this is kind of where it's going, there's now precedent to make some changes, because we've really seen that these phantom medical damages, that aren't filed, all of these three things that are in the bill or in the law now really compound with one another. So the inflated medical damages result in, it could be nuclear damages or a nuclear verdict. You can hold on. We have a lot of cases that they're 1% at fault. The trial attorney holds on to it for 3 years because it's not a good case, but hey, that truck was there. We can make the argument that that's 1% is just being present at the intersection. So let's just go for it.
Yeah.
So all of these things we really feel are going to positively change the legal environment for trucking, and cut down on these really, frivolous lawsuits that clog up the court, cost a ton of money, and put us in this sue and settle cycle. Because the fact is, Florida trucking companies, for the most part, aren't going to go to court. They're not going to risk their business and risk their insurance to go to court when, these trial attorneys know that, and they'll just, quickly sue to settle.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point for folks to understand, because it can be a sensitive subject. We're talking about, usually in most cases, somebody who is seriously injured or somebody who dies in an accident. And so I think it's important to clarify that when we're talking about tort reform, we're not talking about depriving injured plaintiffs or their families of the relief that they are entitled to, the best that we can do through monetary damages. What we are talking about instead, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, is doing away with what we consider lawsuit abuses, which is taking it beyond those compensatory damages and looking more into what we consider like punitive damages, intended to punish the other party for their actions or inactions in the case. And it's often those punitive damages that skyrocket the total award, like the $1 billion case that we talked about that I think kind of brought this all to a head in Florida, at least from my perspective. If you look at that case, there were $100 million in compensatory damages awarded to the family of the deceased plaintiff in that case, but $900 million of that award was punitive damages intended to punish the two motor carriers involved in that particular case. And it's that section of the damages that is really the focus of this kind of lawsuit abuse and tort reform that we're talking about.
You're absolutely right. And the first message that we told legislators, and we tried to communicate to the public, much to the trial attorneys' kind of misinformation campaign that they tried to launch during this process, is if a trucking company is wrong, if they do wrong, if they are negligent, they 100% should be responsible. They need to make things right. They need to make people whole, take care of that person, or in some instances, take care of the families who need to take care of that person or their family. We are 100% in support of that. But that's not, you're right, that is not what is happening. And one of the messages was that this bill would prevent people from getting their medical bills paid or prevent them from recovering damages. And we had to be very quick and quite frankly, pretty aggressive in communicating back that this bill had nothing to do with punitive or non-economic damages, or also what is known as pain and suffering. Sky is still the limit in Florida. However, with those, if we're not seeing inflated medical damages, if the jury is seeing what is true, what these bills actually cost, or what they should cost for an insurance company to repay, a jury is able to then come to a verdict for future medical damages. The future medical damages, the percentage at fault, directly relates to how high that pain and suffering. Because if you see as a jury member that someone has a sprained ankle and that medical bill is $2 million, and so then you assume that the medical future damages for that bad ankle is $10 million. Now you're starting to talk huge pain and suffering or punitive damages. So to get the evidence accurate and in front of juries is really the first step to squash the rest of the system.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think another important thing to take away from that, a lot of people get caught up, I think, in the number. Like, for example, when you hear folks talk about nuclear verdicts and people are debating whether that's a bad thing or a good thing or whatever, and they talk about $10 million kind of being the number that we use when we're talking about nuclear verdicts. That's just a number that I think the American Transportation Research Institute used as kind of it drew the line somewhere and it picked $10 million. But I think what we're actually concerned with, more so than the number, because as you say, sometimes you may run into a situation where an injured plaintiff incurs damages that exceed $10 million. But that is not our concern. Our concern are cases where the awarded damages just do not line up with the actual damages sustained in the particular accident. There's no correlation between the two, and so we end up with these multi-million-dollar, now billion-dollar jury verdicts out there in these various jurisdictions throughout the country that are really causing problems for trucking companies in particular. They're just being put out of business because of this, and it is causing their insurance premiums to inflate because the insurers are now having to deal with this. It's this whole idea of like social inflation where where society at large is becoming numb to these huge numbers. We previously, I think before the $1 billion case, the largest jury verdict against a trucking company was somewhere in the range of $400 million or something, and that was incredible at the time. But now we've got a $1 billion case, so $400 million doesn't seem like all that much in comparison. And you start to think like that, and it's easy to go down that path for sure. I was curious kind of what your impression was. I know you were in the room when Governor DeSantis finally signed the bill here just within the last few weeks. Give us kind of your take on what that was like being in the room for that.
Oh, it was great. It was really positive. It was, as you can see by the photo, a very intimate group. It was the bill sponsors, Tommy Gregory, Representative Tommy Gregory, Tom Fabrizio, and Senator Travis Hudson, and then you have Senate President Kathleen Passidomo, and the Speaker of the House, Paul Renner, 3 FTA members, myself, and a couple of other industry leaders. And it was just it's always wonderful to be acknowledged and supported. It was such a team effort for what we were doing, both from the association and across different industries, because one of the main reasons that this moves so quickly, it stayed the same for the most part, from filing to signing, is that we all really stood together, and instead of backbiting or us trying to, everyone trying to throw little amendments here and there or changing things, it's, this is what we requested, here's the bill. We're going to support you. We're going to support our legislative leaders, our governor, to get this done.
Yeah, that's huge, because that's what a lot of folks may not know. That's where things fall apart in the legislative process, when people are trying to get their own small agendas put into bills that have nothing to do with what the bill's talking about. So little things like that can really derail legislation. So congrats on getting this across the finish line for sure. So Florida is just the latest in a line of states that seem to be passing. They're not all the same, but tort reform legislation, I'll just call it. What's your outlook on this for the rest of the country?
Well, there are so many people that ask me that question right now, especially because, everyone kind of sees it as an easy layup. We've got a strong, supermajority Republican legislature, and then the governor is very powerful right now, versus other states, say, with Democrat leadership. And we really based a lot of our research, our best practices, and language on what was working with other states. Because obviously you can't translate specific laws or languages from, say, Montana to Florida, but you can use those ideas. And so really working together with different states and seeing what was working, and then also what was the outcome. Because if they're, me being able to go up to a legislator and say, this happened in Texas, and this is what we have seen. So to be able to get that information from other state trucking associations was incredibly important. But I will say, for states that maybe are reticent to do it, or what's the point, we all really need to remember that while people may make it a partisan or political agenda, it really should not be. And people need to kind of avoid that avenue for it, because good policy is good policy. And you need to tell the story of not the trial attorneys versus the insurance companies, because no one likes either in general. You need to find a face for it, and a story and a narrative of really how it affects real businesses, real people. And so this year it was trucking, and trucking got to tell its story. But other states really need to step away from the Democrat versus Republican and really show what a positive judicial system will do for everyone.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, if anybody's interested, like I mentioned, our very first episode of Trucksafe Live, we had we talked about nuclear verdicts in that episode as well, and we had John Esparza from Texas Trucking Association on that show to talk about, at the time, Texas had just passed their HB 19, which was their version of tort reform. So if you're interested in seeing how the two kind of compare, go back and watch that episode. Running out of time here, Alix. Appreciate you joining us. Like I said, congrats on the big win here. Really appreciate hearing about it from you directly. What else? I'm just curious. What else does Florida Trucking Association have going on now, and where can folks find out more about what you're doing for the state?
Well, we are about to launch our statewide outreach for workforce, education and workforce. We have received a lot of great funding for CDL drivers and diesel techs in the past couple of years. We received a state grant, so we'll be launching a website and a documentary so people can learn more about the trucking industry to try to bring in that next generation. We have, of course, our truck driving championships in Daytona Beach, which is open to the public June 15th through the 17th. It's one of the biggest in the country. Our dinner award ceremony has about 1,200 people, so it's a really intimate event. And then, always, we're still keeping one eye open with the legislature. We still have a few weeks left to push forward some bills, try to kill some others, and then hopefully take a little rest.
Yeah, well-deserved rest. Well, thanks again so much, Alix. Appreciate you joining us, and we'll definitely keep watching what all you've got going on down there in Florida. So thanks again.
Thanks for having me.
All right, great discussion there with Alix about Florida's recently passed HB 837 tort reform. Very interesting topic. If you want to find out more about exactly what it does in the state with respect to these types of cases that we're talking about, you can find more information about it on Florida Trucking Association's website. Next up, I wanted to bring on our next guest, which is Bill Kanasky, Dr. Bill Kanasky of Vice President of Courtroom Sciences. Welcome, Bill.
How's it going? I'm a little upset because I did not get the invite to the DeSantis bill signing. I don't know.
I didn't see you in the picture. Were you? It was like, where's Waldo?
My invitation got lost in the mail.
Let's see if we see you in here anywhere.
Everybody there has hair. Well, actually, two of these guys. Three. Look at that. Three bald guys.
I'd be wearing my hat.
I'm a little disappointed, so I got to start off with my podcast. I start off with a rant. I just started off with the rant. I'm a little upset, but DeSantis is great. I'm happy he signed the bill and created complete total chaos in the state of Florida.
Yeah, for sure. Well, we'll let Alix know that you need to get the invite to the next bill signing for sure. Hey, kind of like we did with Alix, I think you were on listening. For folks who aren't familiar with Courtroom Sciences and what you're doing over there, can you kind of just give us a background, how you got into trucking and what you do through Courtroom Sciences?
Yeah, Courtroom Sciences is a full-service litigation support firm, and we really focus on really two areas: your standard jury consulting, so doing jury research in the form of focus groups, mock trials, and in-court, jury selection consultation. That's half of what we do. The other half of what we do is a lot of time training witnesses, key witnesses, for both deposition and trial testimony. And we're all psychologists. I'm trained as a clinical neuropsychologist, and I was on the academic track. I got to tell you, Brandon, I was on the academic track. I had told my family, hey, I'm going to be a professor at a big time university. Here we go. And then I took this wicked left turn in my career. It turned out to be the best move of one of the best moves of my life.
Yeah, I think we're a little similar in that regard, probably.
It was not the plan. It was not the plan. But when I got into it, I completely fell in love with it because I could use clinical psychology, neuropsychology every day, both in studying jurors and helping witnesses prepare to testify. And as I started getting really good at this, I started writing papers, publishing them nationally, doing a lot of public speaking. And that's really where the trucking people found me and said, hey, we've got problems. We need your help because we have problems with juries. And our witnesses do oftentimes struggle when they're testifying and get beat up by plaintiff attorneys. And if you could help us with that, and that was I'm in my 20th year, so I've been doing this quite a while, and absolutely head over heels in love with it, as well as the trucking industry. These are the best people. I mean, I work in medical and I work in products, I work in construction, all of that. But the best people in the country are the people in the trucking industry, and I love working with those companies and those people.
Well, our viewers will be glad to hear that, I think. So
yes, thumbs up.
So you've been on the front line fighting against so-called reptile theory of litigation. This is something that Alix and I hit on a little bit, but for folks who aren't familiar with the concept of the reptile theory of litigation, wondering if you can give a 30,000-foot overview of what it is and the trouble that it tends to cause.
Yeah. Okay. So for anyone in the audience that has never heard of reptile theory, I'm not sure what rock you've been living under since 2009. Please, people, come on, wake up. Yeah, it's been around for a while. Big picture. Well, it's kind of a double-edged sword. So the way the plaintiffs bar, it's the number one area that the plaintiffs bar goes for training to attack defendants. And the trucking industry is in the crosshairs, right? Of the plaintiffs bar. It always has been, and it continues to be because of these the size of these verdicts that we've been seeing. And what they will say is that they've come up with special ways to go into a courtroom to access and trigger the reptile brain in the jurors, and then blah 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 blah. It's a bunch of it's garbage. It's absolutely garbage science, but it's a really cool sales pitch, right? But I've broken down the whole theory. I think I've published like 9 papers on this topic. They're all out there for free, so you should read up on them. But what the reptile theory strategy really is, it's a very, very, very aggressive plaintiff strategy when approaching litigation, in which they're really focusing on 2 areas to what I call getting the lead early in the game. Okay, so remember, the span of litigation is pretty long. It's typically several years, and what they want to do is they want to go into the locker room at halftime and they want to be up 42-10. That's what they want to do, and that's how they get what I call nuclear settlements, which is the bigger problem versus nuclear verdicts. We could talk about that later, but that's what they're doing. They're being very aggressive with number one, absolutely destroying these key trucking witnesses at deposition and videotaping it. When I say key witness, I mean the corporate rep or person most knowledgeable, the safety directors, they're a huge target. And of course, the drivers, oftentimes the director or heads of HR are another target. And they beat these witnesses up bad with reptile types of questions. And these witnesses crash and burn. And when that happens, the value of the demand, the value of the case skyrockets. So a large part of what I do is traveling around the country to these trucking companies, working with these witnesses to train them, okay, to be bulletproof against reptile theory. So then when they are deposed and they testify, those deps are effective. The value of the case comes down. So that's kind of the first part of reptile attack. The second part of reptile attack is, and hats off to the plaintiffs bar. They do a lot of jury research and they do it early. They figure out which cases are the lottery tickets. And how do they do that? Well, they do focus groups. They do mock trials, something that the defense typically waits on. They kind of want to wait things out, a very reactive approach. Well, when you have a reactive approach going against a proactive approach, that's a recipe for disaster. So those are the 2 areas that the reptile plaintiff movement, they've done very, very well on that, catching both trucking companies and insurance companies, catching them with their pants down. And when that happens and it's halftime of the game and it's 42-10, well, financially, economically, and strategically, you're in big trouble. And so that's really what they've been doing. There's a whole chapter on, we could talk about courtroom stuff, but 98% of cases settle. This is a discovery issue, and that's where the vast majority of money is being lost in nuclear settlements, not nuclear verdicts.
Yeah, you really can't put the toothpaste back in the tube once it's come out. So they're banking on that happening early in the case and then taking advantage of that to leverage a huge settlement out of it. Even if folks are familiar with the reptile theory kind of generally, I bet that many people don't know that there's a published book on this topic on how to prosecute using the reptile theory. There's conferences that the plaintiff's bar has on teaching folks how to pursue this type of questioning. And I'm curious, how, as a psychologist, how much of this theory hinges on psychology, and how so?
About 0%.
Okay.
Here's the funny part.
I gave them too much credit.
The sales pitch. Yeah, that's the sales pitch. It's really, the sales pitch is a bunch of garbage. All the brain talk when they have. I happen to have a copy of the reptile book. And by the way, if you or your audience would like a copy, if you go on eBay, I think it's about $1,400 right now. $1,400, or just
to get $1 billion case.
I mean, just read my articles. Yeah. Here's where the real psychology is in the reptile theory, and there is a chapter about this that's very quiet, right? Where the psychology has nothing to do with the jury. The psychology is against three people, and to get these three people at each other's throats in litigation, because that's how they get their money. Okay, the owner of the trucking company, number one. Number two, the defense attorney. Number three, the insurance claims specialist. Right. Those three people, the psychology between them, that's what reptile theory is designed to do, is they go up 42-10. Yeah. What do you think the coaching meeting is like in the locker room during a football game, right? Your team's down 42-10, and you and your assistant coaches are meeting. Brandon, what do you think that discussion is like in the locker room? It's not very positive, right?
I can imagine it's similar to most of the discussions at halftime of the Colts games this past season.
That would be it. That would be it. As a disgruntled Bears fan, let's not even go there. Hey, number one pick, baby. But listen, that's the
I thought they traded that away.
Yeah. Well, hey, listen,
regardless,
they're still going to get a top 5 pick. And so what happens is the owner of the trucking company, the insurance claims person, and the defense counsel are all looking at each other like, we're down 42-10. What are we going to do? Right. And there's a lot of finger pointing going on. There's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of stress. And it ends up, that's the formula to get your money. That's what they're doing. And it works. So I've developed a system to say, hey, let's go in the halftime with at least the score tied. Hey, and maybe we're up a touchdown, because then all of your economic leverage changes in the case.
For sure. And you said early on that you've helped hundreds of trucking companies over the years and their witnesses prepare for these types of cases. And I've had I've been able to sit through a lot of your talks at various conferences over the years and see of these videos that you show of witnesses getting themselves in trouble in these types of cases, and they're just incredible.
Yeah, it's and they're very good learning tools, and I use that in my witness training program. And I have a bunch of bad examples of here's what not to do. And I mean, back to my sports analogies, I break them down like game film with the witnesses, and hit pause and say, here's what's going on in this witness's brain. Here's the mistake they're making. Here's why, and here's how we're going to train you to avoid that mistake. So they're very, very useful tools. And then we have the other set of videos that are all the great performances, and we break that down too. So there's a lot of training that goes into effective testimony. And listen, defense counsel does a great job, but they're not clinical psychologists. They don't understand the effects of, faulty cognition or, fight or flight response patterns, things like that. So when you team up a well-trained clinical psychologist, you team them up with a really good defense counsel, you've got a pretty devastatingly effective team there, and that's what I do.
Yeah, we had talked about trying to show some of those examples here, and we just couldn't get it to work. I'm curious if you could kind of give folks a feel for maybe some of the worst, one of the worst fails that you've seen on the witness front over the years.
Man, there's too many to count. Kind of more generally, witnesses tend to fail for a couple different reasons I can outline for you. And I cover this with all my witnesses. Number one, this is people in this society. Okay. Our brains are not wired to listen very carefully or to think very carefully. Okay. And if you get a witness that doesn't listen really carefully to the whole question, they make silly mistakes. When they don't process the information very carefully, okay, they don't think long enough, they make silly mistakes. Okay, so if you don't listen well, you don't think well, you're going to make what I call cognitive errors. You're going to make cognitive errors, and you're going to say things that are inaccurate or harmful in your testimony. Why? Because you're going too fast. You're going too fast. You're at a conversational pace with a assassin, right, who's the plaintiff attorney who does this every day, and you have no chance. So one of the top skills I have to teach witnesses is to slow them down, maximize their listening skills, their cognition skills, and that will lead to more accurate answers. But that's not enough. The other big problem that I see are witnesses that go into what we call fight or flight response patterns. So plaintiff attorneys can get ugly during deposition and trial testimony with witnesses, and your brain is wired for survival. And so if you have somebody attacking you, your subcortical fight or flight, right, mechanism takes over, and you want to fight for survival, or you want to run away for survival. And the way witnesses do that is, if they want to fight, they become argumentative, they become defensive, they become evasive, and they start yapping away, okay, trying to go to war with a professional assassin, and you've never been to war before. It just leads to very, very bad things. When people get emotional, particularly angry, they will say crazy things, and it's going to hurt the case, drive the value of the case up. But they could also go flight. I've seen several of people in the truck, and by the way, I've met some of the toughest people, males and females, in this industries, but some people do have the flight mechanism, and we're susceptible to that. So when the heat gets turned up, they want to run away. And the way they do that is they just start talking. And okay, let me explain. Meaning, I will say anything to get out of this damn chair, anything. And they will then say crazy things because that fight or flight process takes over. So another part of the training is to desensitize the witness. We have a very special training program so that they can keep their cool. If the plaintiff attorney, reptile or not, is pounding the table and smoke is coming out of their ears, our witnesses are still going to be effective because they're very, very highly trained.
And what I don't think people realize is that, number one, the witnesses are getting lulled into a false sense of security with these assassin plaintiffs attorneys who are making it look like they're the best friend up there. Just have a conversation with me. We're just talking here. And then they end up getting emotional, or they're running away from it, and they're just jabbering on. And what they don't realize is that what feels like they're being clear at the time in person does not translate well on paper. And on paper, it just looks terrible, what you said about the company, when it's reduced to paper. And then that testimony from your deposition is out there for all to see on that paper forever. So it just causes a lot of trouble.
Particularly with the corporate rep. And that's a big deal with the corporate reps. And I know a lot of people ask me, well, do we really need to do all this stuff for small cases, medium? It's just the big cases? Well, listen, your 30B6 corporate rep testimony lasts forever. It follows you forever. So if you gave a dep 4 years ago, that dep's going to be used against you in subsequent litigation. And particularly in those deps, which are so economically important, and where the reptile folks have gone, is all the safety language. And that's really where that's kind of the main theme of the reptile attack, is they go after all the safety language, which, by the way, this industry, along with healthcare, has painted themselves into the worst corner I've ever seen in my life. And so some advice I can give to your audience right now, and I do this when I'm on stage. I did it last week in Vegas when I was on stage doing Mongoose Method for 2 days. By the way, I spoke for 17 hours over a 3-day period. I lost my voice, my knees hurt, my back hurt. Is this terrible?
But did you win any money?
I know, right? Where these plaintiff attorneys go, which is a smorgasbord, it's a treasure trove of ammunition, is they go to the trucking company website, where you have put the dumbest things in the world on your website. So when I speak,
safety is our number one priority.
Oh, it's the worst. It's the worst thing ever, because A, it's not true. But B, that's going to be a cross-examination question, and you've just raised the bar of responsibility and accountability from something reasonable to something completely idealistic and unrealistic. So when I give speeches to the trucking organizations or the companies around, I'll bring up their websites, or the people in the audience. I bring up the company website and go through it, and everybody's like this. I'm like, all right, who's the owner of XYZ Trucking Company? And you see this guy in the back, like, I'm like, okay, let's go through your website. And I'm like, cha-ching, cha-ching. And I'm like, delete. But the great thing is I give them the information, how they can fix that very carefully, because that's the first place that the plaintiff's bar is going. The second place they're going to go, which is equally as destructive, policies and procedures and training manuals. The dumbest thing, the dumbest things I've ever seen in my life are put in policies, procedures, training manuals. Awful, awful, awful. And then you hand it over to the plaintiff's counsel, and they just beat you over the head relentlessly with it over and over again during the depth. So 2 things that you could do: go to your website and analyze it. Get the word anything safety related, just get it off of there. It's entirely unnecessary. And then be very careful with how you're describing safety and rules and things like that in your policies and procedures, because that's going to be the top source of cross-examination questions.
Yeah, where I see it go wrong a lot is a lot of those policies will start out with some kind of a high-level mission statement or something like that, where they're putting that type of language, that idealistic language in there, and then, like you said, that's just used to beat them over the head with when it gets down to litigation.
It is.
So curious, we're running out of time here. Could talk about this for literally 17 hours apparently, but
I'm happy to come back.
What's your advice for trucking companies, your overall advice for those companies that get tied up in any type of case? You mentioned it doesn't really matter how small or big it is. What's your advice to them?
Okay. Well, first thing, I live in Florida like Alix, but I work all over the country. So I just happen to be home here in the Orlando area today, but every June 1st, do you know what June 1st is here in Florida?
Is it a holiday?
Hurricane. It's a holiday because it's my birthday, Brandon, number 1. Okay, so first off, everybody, June 1st is my birthday. I'm expecting inbox. Yeah, I'm expecting emails. I'm expecting cards and gifts, right? But the second thing going on in Florida besides my birthday on June 1st is the start of hurricane season. And my family and I, and even our neighbors, we all get together and we plan. We make a list of things we need. I go to Home Depot on a regular day. I load up. Okay. I have a plan. I sit down with my family. If this happens, here's what we're doing. If this happens, here's what we're doing. Well before the storm comes, Brandon. And if the storm comes, by the way, we got hit by 2 hurricanes in 46 days last year. I was ready. And the year before, we got hit by another one. The year before, we got hit by none. Thing is, have your plan well before a lawsuit's filed so you know what to do. A crisis management plan, take care of these websites, policies, all that. Do that before the storm comes. When the storm comes, and it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, the first thing you do is get on the horn with your insurance company and your defense counsel and get moving. And hopefully they'll call me too, because it's a race. Every second is precious from the moment that accident happens to get going, because the plaintiff attorney will be in deep as fast as they can, and that's how they get that 42-10 lead. You have to be very, very proactive, work with your insurance company, work with your defense counsel, and start to prepare as early as possible. Be proactive, just like the bad guys, because that's what they do. Be just as proactive with them, not reactive, and you're going to be in a much, much better position, both strategically and financially, as the litigation goes forward.
Yeah, it's a similar message that we're preaching to our clients every single day, is the need to be proactive from our perspective on DOT compliance, because if not, then when you're in the fire, it's too late at that point to do anything that you should have been doing to prepare yourself to keep you out of that fire to begin with. So, all right. That wraps up our time here. Really appreciate you joining us, Bill. Where can folks find out more about what you're doing over at Courtroom Sciences, and tell us about your podcast that you do?
Yeah, just go to courtroomsciences.com. Okay, because this is my baby. I'm glad we say this for last. And many trucking companies, their employees, and even drivers are listening to my podcast. It's called the Litigation Psychology Podcast, and it's the only one of its kind. And we talk about all these jury issues, witness training. We talk about the impacts of depositions, trial testimony, everything that has to do with litigation. Cover reptile theory constantly, all this fun stuff. It's a really good and very unique mix of neuroscience that we use in litigation to help our trucking clients resolve these cases much, much cheaper or win a trial. It's a very clever combination of that, combined with unapologetic, just hilarious humor. It's a mix. you've got to laugh during this podcast. It's got to be entertaining. So we do a mix of both. So
Nice.
you're going to learn something. You're going to learn something, and you're going to laugh your ass off. I mean, what more do you want in the podcast? Come on.
Exactly. That's something you don't get here much of.
Not yet.
Yeah, maybe we'll bring you on. We'll bring you on in each of our episodes, and we'll have you kind of be the comedic relief to the podcast.
Well, I'm going to get you on my podcast. If you like, I'd like to invite you to my podcast right now, and I will email you. We'll get you on.
Let's do it.
Then we'll switch seats, and then
right.
You'll be on the litigation psychology podcast, and then we'll have a little fun. How about that?
All right, sounds good to me. Hey, Bill, really appreciate you joining me. We're gonna wrap things up. Thanks everybody for joining us today. A couple things here before we wrap up. Make sure that you subscribe to our newsletter if you haven't already. Like I said, one of the things that we pushed out today was a notification about that notice that came out from FMCSA about the crash preventability determination program and changes to it. So we're constantly pushing stuff out like that, not only on our social media channels, but also through our newsletter. So I'd encourage you to sign up for that. Follow us on social media. We're pretty active on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, if you're interested in all these types of DOT compliance topics that we post about pretty frequently. Stay tuned for our next episode of Trucksafe Live. We usually do 1 or 2 of these episodes per month. You can find it live on our social media channels, but also you can download the podcast wherever you get your podcast. Thanks again to the sponsor of this season of Trucksafe Live, which is LogRock. Really appreciate you teaming up with us and helping us make this possible. That's all I got. Really appreciate you joining us. Stay tuned, like I said, for the next show, and we look forward to seeing you there. Thanks, everyone.